Hello again. My name is James Byrne, and in today's episode, I'm going to share with you why I believe Brigham Young was the originator of polygamy, uh, that Joseph Smith was a monogamist and condemned polygamy all his life, as did Hiram and Emma. And in this episode, we're going to speak how and what Brigham did and share with you some of the references that prove what I'm saying. Let's start with mentioning in a surprise statement given in 1869, Brigham told U.S. Senator Lyman Trumbull that polygamy had actually originated in Utah years after the death of Joseph Smith. Uh, if we go to the True Latter-day Saints Herald, an interview with Brigham Young. And let me take out of that what Brigham says. As to our institutions, we know we are right. And polygamy, which you object to, was not originally a part of our system, but was adopted by us as a necessity after we came here. And that's in the True Latter-day Saints Herald, volume 16, and that's the link there. So what is as clear and as distinct as that? Brigham gets to Utah and starts adopting and advocating, practicing polygamy, and admits it was not part of our system originally. Do I need to even go on with this episode? That's as a strong point as ever. Brigham is admitting polygamy was started by us when they moved to Utah. But as there's some other great content in this episode, I shall continue. About 1869, the US government was threatening the church with all sorts of laws. Brigham's Young best offense was that it was a religious rite. So Brigham had to prove that Joseph Smith, the founder, also practiced and promoted polygamy. Therefore, Brigham needed legitimacy as the president of the church. The RLDS, which are the Reorganized Latter-day Saints missionaries, uh, amongst were some of the sons of Joseph and Emma, came out to the West to teach that their father was not a polygamist, and they received many converts. Brigham Young then wanted to defend his position by falsely asserting that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. So Brigham Young and others like Joseph F. Smith gathered affidavits in 1869. Let's go on to discuss about Schuyler Colfax journal published in 1889, who would become the future vice president of the USA, visits Brigham. And Brigham asks Schuyler plumply the question what he intended to do about polygamy. And Schuyler says, I replied very frankly that I thought it was about time to have another revelation abolishing it. All present smiled, and he said he would be glad if it could be so, that it had been a great trial for him to submit to it, that the revelations of the Doctrine and Covenants declared for monogamy, but that polygamy was a later revelation commanded by God to him and a few others, and permitted and advised to the rest of the church, but he said it was often abused. So clearly, again, evidence that, I mean, Brigham is saying it was a later revelation that they practiced in Utah, and monogamy was the original practice of marriage. And there's the references for Schuyler Fairfax, and he was the Speaker of Representatives 1863 to 69. He visited Brigham Young in 1865, and he was the Vice President from 69 to 1873. So we'll discuss a bit about Brigham Young and how there was a race-based priesthood ban that never was with Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith ordained to the priesthood African uh, men. Brigham Young had the Adam God theory. He was into blood atonement. He mentioned polygamy was essential to exaltation. And, you know, we see how it became the doctrine of the church through Doctrine and Covenants section 132, which was added by Brigham and presented to church in 1852 after Joseph had died. New York Times, 1865. This is regarding the what Schuyler full speaker Colfax, a member of had recently passed through Utah while at Salt Lake City, had a conference with the prophet Brigham Young, in the course of which Colfax remonstrated earnestly against the barbarous institution of polygamy. The prophet said in reply that it was no essential part of polygamy, Mormonism, that it did not exist in the early days of the Mormon Church, that it was not enjoined in the Book of Mormon, and that if the Lord were to give him a revelation that it should be stopped, he would cheerfully enforce the divine injunction. It seemed that from the prophet's remark that he was in expectation of receiving such a revelation. We hope he will get it before the next session of Congress, though we hardly know how he will dispose of his 70 wives. Right, we go on to discuss about Brigham Young's second wife, Augusta Cobb. Augusta Cobb was married to Henry Cobb, while Brigham Young married her while she's still married to Henry Cobb. In 1847, Henry was so upset that he took Augusta to court and sues for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Henry wins. So at least by a legal standard, Brigham Young is legally acknowledged to be an adulterer in 1847. Now, there is a very articulate and wonderful woman by the name of Catherine van Valkenburg Waite. And she writes a book, The Mormon Prophet and His Harem, an authentic history of Brigham Young, his numerous wives and children. She was a mother of 6, suffragette, reformer, lawyer, and so many more. Lived in Salt Lake from 62 to 64 and wrote this book. And within it, she mentions, but the greatest change of all in the Mormon religion made by Brigham Young was the introduction and establishment of polygamy. There was no part of the Mormon system of religion as originally established. On the contrary, it was expressly repudiated by all the Mormon writers and speakers previous to 1852 and in Europe for some years afterwards. We also reference the famous, well-celebrated writer Mark Twain in a book called Roughing It. The people accepted the pious fraud with the maddest enthusiasm, and Brigham's power was sealed and secured for all time. Within 5 years afterwards, he openly added polygamy to the tenets of the church by authority of a revelation which he pretended had been received 9 years before by Joseph Smith, albeit Joseph is amply on record as denouncing polygamy to the day of his death. And there is the writings of Mark Twain. Polygamy is a recent feature in the Mormon religion and was added by Brigham Young after Joseph Smith's death. Before that, it was regarded as an abomination. And even Mark Twain quotes the verse from the book of Jacob, which, as we know, describes it as an abomination. This is Mark Twain. How wonderful was it for Mark Twain to mention that? By 1874, Brigham was trying to prove to the US government that polygamy was a tenet originated with Joseph. Brigham Young's prophecy regarding polygamy. Now, this is interesting. Brigham says, I tell you, for I know it, for it will sail over and ride triumph over all the prejudice and priestcraft of the day. It will be fostered and believed in by the more intelligent portions of the world as one of the best doctrines ever proclaimed to any people. His first prophecy, it is clear to say that the prophecy was not fulfilled in fact, the exact opposite came about. So less than 2 years later, after this prophecy, the Republican Party of the United States was formed. Abraham Lincoln's party, under the banner of rooting out the twin relics of barbarism, polygamy and slavery. So there's just one example of how opposite what actually happened was to what Brigham Young prophesied. Brigham Young prophetically says, your hearts need not beat, nor need not think that a mob is coming here to tread on the sacred liberty which the Constitution of our country guarantees for us, for it will not be. The prophecy proved to be false because between May 1857 and July 1858, known as the Utah War, the largest U.S. Army came against the church in Utah. Brigham Young goes on to prophesy destruction upon the United States if they don't adopt polygamy. Brigham says, if the United States do not adopt that very method, let them continue as they are now, pursue the precise course they are now pursuing, and will come to this, that their generations will not live until they are 30 years old. They are going to destruction. Disease is spreading so fast among the inhabitants of the United States that they are born rotten with it, and it will, in a few years, they are gone. Contrary to what Brigham Young prophesied, the church did not flourish with polygamy. They barely survived. Church leaders were forced into hiding. Many of them were imprisoned. Many men were imprisoned. Many polygamists were forced to leave the United States. They went to Mexico. The church, as this progressed, the church lost complete control of the government. They lost most of their holdings and properties. The church faced complete destruction to the point that in 1891, Wilford Woodruff delivered sermons at stake conferences. Wilfred Woodruff said that the inspired question that the Lord told him to ask, which is the wisest counsel for the Latter-day Saints to pursue, to continue, to attempt to practice plural marriage with the laws of the nation against it, and the opposition and 60 million of people. So remember that Brigham Young prophesied that everybody would see it as the best doctrine ever taught, and at the cost of the confiscation and loss of all the temples, and the stopping of all ordinances therein, both for the living and the dead, and the imprisonment of the first presidency and the 12, and the heads of families of all in the church, and the confiscation of personal property of all people, all of which of themselves would stop the practice of, or after doing and suffering what we have taught our adherents to this principle, to cease to practice and submit to the law, and through doing so leave the prophets and the apostles and fathers at home so they can instruct the people and to attend to the duties of the church, and also leave the temples in the hands of the saints so that they can attend to the ordinances of the gospel for both the living and the dead. The Lord showed me by vision and revelation exactly what would take place if we did not stop this practice. If we had not stopped it, all ordinances would be stopped throughout the land of Zion. Confusion would reign throughout Israel, and many men would be made prisoners. This trouble would have come upon the whole church, and we would have been compelled to stop the practice. Now, the question is whether we should be stopped in this manner or in the way the Lord manifested to us, and leave our prophets and apostles and fathers, free men, and the temples in the hands of the people so that the dead may be redeemed. So this is so interesting. So again, that word confusion will. The Lord made it clear to Wilford Woodruff, if the saints did not forsake the polygamy, they would be destroyed. So Brigham Young's prophecy were completely the opposite of what actually happened. But the most important part of this to me is prophecies that did come true. And the prophecy did come true that the church was almost destroyed. Totally different to what Brigham Young had said. Jacob chapter 2 verse 29. Wherefore this people shall keep the commandments, referring specifically to the commandment to have one wife, says the Lord, or cursed be the land for their sake. Jacob verse chapter 2 verse 33. Shall not take away the captives, the daughters of my people, because of the tenderness, save I will visit them with a sore destruction, curse even unto destruction. Just referring to that, teachings on polygamy the prophecy, it proved out. It's pretty clear that Brigham Young prophesied that those who didn't practice polygamy in the United States would face destruction, but the opposite happened. Jacob prophesied that any people of God did practice polygamy on this land would face destruction. And that's what happened. The people of the church almost faced losing the properties, faced destruction and imprisonment and everything. Let's see another one of those affidavits from Ruth Vos Sayers' affidavit, missing date, which tells you that these affidavits from the 1869 were a manufactured thing. Ruth Van Rosayer, who was by me sworn in due form of law upon her oath, says that on the note the blank day of February 1843 at the city of Nauvoo, county of Hancock. In another book, 40 affidavits on celestial marriage. Again, we see in the line here, upon her oath, that on the blank day of February. So these affidavits, it's obvious to see that there was something being manufactured, and we shouldn't uh, put much value in them. Written in the same writing as of Joseph F. Smith, in their desperation to find affidavits, they manufactured so many of them and wasn't too sure of the dates, leaving the dates blank in the documents. Now, it's an interesting read here. I leave the link with you. We don't have the time to go into it, but it's Anne Eliza Webb, the woman who divorced Brigham Young. The 19th wife was one of the documents. Now, this is a document, Thomas Dalford, former Nauvoo resident. He says, I was fully convinced, as I was then, that Brigham Young was in adultery in Manchester, England, in the fall of winter of spring 1840 and 1841. Elizabeth Mayer, in the person with whom Brigham was then committing adultery, my reasons are these. We lived next door to her, under the same roof. Elizabeth Mayer, the father and brother who were gardeners, and they took their dinners as they worked a long piece from home. After they had left for work, Brigham would step into the house, and she would then lock the door and pull down the blinds and curtains, which to me was strange. He never came to see our folk, although not 5 steps apart, and when he left he was always in a hurry, and never came to the door with him when he was leaving. I am now satisfied that he was in adultery in Manchester. Seeds of polygamy were sown, and Brigham was the sower. I was present at the meeting in the grove at Nauvoo about 3 weeks before Joseph and Hiram was murdered. Joseph made a public statement in the presence of 3,000 people that polygamy was being practiced secretly by some, and that it had crept into the church secretly and must be put down speedily, or the church would be driven from Nauvoo. I was satisfied that Joseph was not in favour of it at all, would swear to all I stated. Brigham knew of the revelation in England, and he says here, I knew the doctrine of polygamy by revelation to myself when I was in England before it was revealed to me by Joseph. So this is Brigham Young receiving his own revelation, because revelation would come through the prophet, and this would have been Joseph Smith at the time. It would not come to Brigham Young. So the polygamy was his own lustful imaginations of his heart that came to him while he was in England. As we say again, Schuyler Fairfax Journal, the revelations of the Doctrine and Covenants declared for monogamy, but that polygamy was a later revelation commanded by God to him, Brigham, and a few others. And as we said again, 1869 in the New York Times reported that Brigham Young said, came to Utah, the subject polygamy was not broached. It was not until we had a revelation of the subject, until they came to Utah. Brigham Young, I'm just repeating, as our institutions, we know that we are right, and polygamy, which you object to, was not original part of our system and was adopted by us after we came to Utah. What can be, and that was in the New York Times in June 1874, and later printed in the Deseret News. I said already, Joseph Smith got the revelation to him in the 1839, 1840. Here is something, 8th of October, 1866, in General Conference. This is Brigham Young discussing how I heard Joseph tell him that if the church was left to his leadership, he would lead it directly to hell. He never appointed his brother Hiram to be his successor. He never even thought of such a thing. And if my word is good for anything, I can say to a truth that Joseph told me not 3 months before he was killed, and I did not seek the information he gave me, that this is totally untrue, because Hiram Smith, as we know, was a co-president of the church and would have been the had he survived the martyrdom in Carthage, would have been the president of the church after Joseph's death. And even at that, as we've shown in previous episodes, that Joseph Smith's son, Joseph Smith III, was already ordained to be the successor. So this comment, if anything, it's totally untrue. Let's compare. Brigham claims he was by himself when Joseph tells him about polygamy, but then Heber claims he was with Brigham and Willard when they first learned about this. So you're wondering what is true. There's not an agreement. Let's read from Lydia Ann Wright. I should have I remember so well when I was a girl in my teens listening to Grandma Moffat telling my dearest friend, her granddaughter, Olive Thomas Mortimer, and myself stories of early days in Nauvoo when she was young. One stayed in my mind above all else because I had already resented the claim of Brigham Young that Joseph Smith was the author of the polygamist doctrine. She said she well remembered Brigham Young had come to her mother's home and explained the polygamous doctrine to her mother and herself as he te- left, telling them, "You must tell of no one of this. We must keep it quiet, for as yet brother Joseph is not with us in this." Being a great granddaughter of Joseph the martyr, I was so impressed by this that I could never forget it. Eliza Smith Inslee. Now, we've heard rumors that there was more women in Utah and they needed polygamy to marry these. Look at the census record for the territory of Utah. Males 20 odd thousand, females 19 odd thousand in 1860. Look at the 1870 and 1880s. There's vastly more males than females in the census. So why the need of polygamy? It was not needed. It didn't make sense. And then because there was more males than females in the census in the territory of Utah, uh, look what they had to do. They had to marry women, girls at 12 years old. And then, as in this record of Alice Stowell, her first child was at the age of 13. So this William Howard Perry, it's it's abhorrent. Here's a document discussing about um, the system was not yet become perfect, and they ask about polygamy, and I won't read it all, but peace and happiness, she replied, are certainly lacking in many polygamous families, but it is all owing to the misconception and misunderstanding upon the part of the wives and their duties. It is the duty of first wives to learn to regard her husband not with a selfish devotion would claim the whole of society in time and attention, but rather as owing attention to other wives. So it's a hard life. Let's compare Brigham Young and King Noah, both of them many wives and concubines. He laid a tax. Uh, Brigham required a tenth of property, as he said himself in History of the Church, Volume 7, 257. I want my support in living by the church. Same with King Noah, laid a tax of all he possessed. King Noah had elegant, spacious building, as did Brigham Young. Brigham Young was mentioned as the richest man in the Western Hemisphere, as did King Noah lay his heart upon riches. Wine bibbler, Brigham Young built a winery and distillery and believed in blood atonement. That's quote, I want my support in living by the church. I leave there the Church History, Volume 7, and that's the link. And be worth your while, the Journal Discourses there in Volume 7. This is in the history of the church. All your surface became all your property. I have always supported myself hitherto before became I want my support in living by the church. Here are some of the places that Brigham Young, not only the Beehive House, the Lion House, the Winter House in St. George, the Garda House, Amelia's Palace in Salt Lake, this uh, exuberant, luxurious kind of a thing. 1870, we have the what acids Brigham Young would have had. And in the divorce case of 1873, we can see what his wife claimed he had, 200 million in net worth. And um, Brigham Young claimed differently. In the Journal of the Discourses, when there was no whiskey, we had to be had here. We needed it for rational purposes. I built a house to make it, so it was Brigham Young, and that brought it and made it. 6 tons of tobacco, rum, and whiskey was brought. Written in that book, the line of the Lord. I've spoke about that already, the 1839, where Brigham Young received this revelation by visions that it was himself that received this polygamy doctrine. The conditions in the church in Utah were very bleak, and I don't have time to go into this. The True Latter-day Saints Herald, an autobiography by Charles Derry, in this document, The Latter-day Truth, is worth reading, as is the autobiography also in the Restoration Bookstore. Go to that link, telling how perilous, dire conditions in Utah, and especially for those families living in the polygamous families, it was very bleak and poverty. This is the thing that Brigham Young had, which was which a woman could, finding a man holding keys of the priesthood higher power and authority than her husband, and he is supposed to take her, he can do so. Otherwise, she's got to remain where she is. This is the second way in which a woman can leave her husband, to whom she has been sealed for time and all eternity. In either of these ways of separation, she can discover there's no need for a bill of divorcement. Uh, the God doctrine theory, which was something that Brigham Young believed in, which was left after as soon as Brigham Young died. It was a doctrine that was not practiced anymore. Joseph F. Smith did lie to the Congress, specifically regarding the testimony before a Senate committee in 1904. He denied the existence of any new plural marriage within the church, despite the ongoing practice of polygamy, leading to his conviction of unlawful cohabitation in 1906. November of 1906, Joseph F. Smith pleaded guilty in Salt Lake City court to unlawful cohabitation regarding plural marriages, receiving in $300 fine. So polygamy did go on after the 1890 um, uh, declaration that it was being disavowed. Characteristics of polygamous people: selfishness and caring to the partner, and we call on Christ's help and power. Equal partners, but I mean, that's for monogamy characteristics, but polygamous characteristics: there's selfishness, there's prideful. In fact, modern church leaders have already disavowed many of Brigham Young's teachings, including the priesthood ban, Adam God theory, the horrific blood atonement, and notably even the teachings on polygamy, specifically that it is essential for exaltation. So what Brigham brought in, these are now disavowed. So say blood atonement, divine racism, which was the priesthood ban, Adam God theory, divine incest, Mary was not a virgin at birth, the trading up marriage doctrine. If we don't believe what Joseph Smith brought in, which was monogamy, and advocated, instead believe what others brought in, which is Brigham Young advocating polygamy, therefore we're disbelieving Joseph Smith. And this was a bit long of an episode, but we'll finish it there now. So clearly, I hope it impresses upon you that polygamy was brought in, advocated, introduced by Brigham Young and Utah leaders. It was not, even by Brigham Young's confession, was not originally part of the church with Joseph Smith. And as we've seen in prior episodes, Joseph Smith condemned it, disavowed it, and excommunicated members practicing it. So there we are today, and we shall speak. There will be another episode on this in the next episode um, regarding this kind of subject matter. So thank you for listening, and that's all for today. Bye for now.